everyone. My name is Agada, and I'm an international development practitioner. I work with the intersections or at the intersections among private sector development, international trade, and gender. Today, I'll be talking to you about a topic that I think is really critical, just given the evolution of things in today's world, and it's women, technology, and society. And basically, what we'll be exploring during this talk is how to use gender-sensitive and gender-transformative solutions to empower women and their communities. This is a Women in Tech This is a Women in Tech conference. I'm sorry. So we'll be kind of considering everything on navigating this subject against the backdrop of technological solutions. A society is a group of individuals involved in persistent social interaction or a large social group sharing the same spatial or social territory, typically subject to the same political authority and dominant cultural expectations. I found this definition to be really interesting because of the different dimensions that it brings to bear. Social context, relational context, political context, and culture. And I think that by the time you begin to look at the definition from these dimensions, it gives you a better appreciation of what a society is, because we are people and already existing in different societies per our communities, our geographies, where we find ourselves and where we work. Just to break this down or deconstruct it so that we get kind of a deeper dive into what we're driving at. At the core of society, you have people, right? And for people to be functional members of the society, I'd like to think that they kind of exist across a number of dimensions of well-being. Physical, intellectual, environmental, vocational, social, emotional, and spiritual. So for physical, you can think about health, intellectual, education, just things that engage our minds, the environment, vocation, your work, your economic welfare, social, your relationships, the groups or societies, civil societies, if you will, that you're functioning, your emotional and spiritual well-being as well. And I think that technology is playing a very amazing and revolutionary role in kind of catalyzing and sustaining, and we can't exhaust kind of the examples to give us a better context of this. Like, you can look at this from physical, you can look at the equipment that you use to work out. For intellectual, you can look at educational technology products. With environment, there are lots of climate smart technologies being used in agriculture, being used in energy to kind of generate clean energy or renewable energy. With vocational, we're doing this conference via Zoom, right? People are working on this conference. People are getting paid out of this conference. There is like an economic social system, if you will, just built around what we're doing now. And, we're in real time experiencing technology being a catalyst for that. With social, you have social media. That's a classic example. For emotional, you have, there are apps that help us with like meditation, to center ourselves, to foster relationships, bonds or connections with people, build networks that last. And spiritual, we have people, practicing their religion over digital communication channels, etc. So I think when we look at these different dimensions of well-being and kind of draw on them to look at how we experience life and how we experience, the interactions that we have with one another, we're able to get a real appreciation for what technology is doing for us in today's world. And all of this culminates in a society, right? Where we're able to see socioeconomic patterns, able to see political patterns, cultural patterns, just given how we interact and the interlinkages that are formed from all these dimensions that we're navigating, and how it fits into other people's interactions and outcomes. Next thing that I want us to really understand before we delve into the crux of what we're going to be talking about is women and society. And I don't think I need to define who a woman is. This is a women in tech conference, and I like to think that most of us who are speaking or attending are women. So there's a clear understanding of who we are and where our identity is. But I think that now we want to take a step forward to kind of dimension where we stand in society, or who the context of the spaces that we occupy in society. And I have like a couple of like just fun facts, if you will, that will help us dimension this better, or understand this better, or be able to contextualize it better, if you will. According to the UN Population Division 2019, women as a percentage of the world population were 49.5%. So that's about half the world's population being women. That says a lot in terms of just the volume of people that that we have who are women, and just the volume of transactions and interactions that we're able to command, given the number that we have. So let's break this down into the different spaces that women occupy. I kind of choose this around like socioeconomic matrices, if you will. Pew Research Center in 2018 found that the rate of women aged 40 to 44 who are mothers was 86%. That's a lot of women, considering the population that I described earlier on. Women as a percentage of the world's consumer base, based on purchasing power and influence, it's 70 to 80%. So you have 70 to 80% of women driving, consumer activity or consumer decisions. That's a lot, considering the volume of business transactions going on annually, across the globe. You have women as a percentage of global labor force as of last year being 38.7%. I'm not sure if you're seeing how the numbers are beginning to dwindle as we kind of navigate the spaces that we occupy from like broader spaces into like more kind of specific spaces that are supposed to then start letting us create value for ourselves. Percentage of businesses owned by women, 33%. That's even less than the percentage of women who are in the labor force. And then you have women's global rates of participation in national level parliament being, it says here 80%. I'm sorry, I think that's wrong. It's about 24, let's say about 25%. So altogether, you see that lots of women who command influence when it comes to the economy, when it comes to markets, because of the number that they have, in terms of just economic transactions, right? And the vital positions that we also have in society in terms of just being mothers, being friends, being business owners, members of clubs, and basically facilitating all these transactions that, kind of can spur the market to thrive, right? When it comes down to it, we find that women are not participating as much when it comes to work, and when it comes to entrepreneurship, women are lagging behind. When it comes to leadership, in terms of like political leadership, women are lagging behind. I think what I wanted to just show you with this slide was just how there is a gender gap. There is a gap between access to opportunities and between men and women, basically. So you want to look at the access to opportunities in terms of resource allocation to enable women occupy and take charge and create value in the different spaces. And so what we've seen here is a clear gender gap, which we kind of wrapped together with the term gender inequality. We're going to be delving into this subsequently. But before we do that, I'd like you to meet Kiku and the women in her life. Kiku is a girl who cannot go to school because of the pandemic and has no access. The keyword here is access to the internet or digital learning tools. So as you can imagine, Kiku's education has been suffering. Meet Kiku's mother, who utilizes telemedicine and has gotten a diagnosis for an ailment that she's suffering at the moment, but has no access to the technology required to deliver the treatment. So perhaps there's no transport system for her to get to the hospitals where she can access whatever technology or medical equipment will be used to administer her treatment. She has no access to, say, drones that would deliver the medication to where she is. So basically, she's kind of started this cycle of where she's utilizing some technology to get some value, but isn't maximizing the benefits, of healthcare that she has access to. Meet Kiko's cousin, who is unemployed and lacks the digital skills required for a career in her field of interest, right? It doesn't help that her father does not think that women should use technology. So she's basically, stuck in this cycle, vicious cycle, if you will, where she doesn't have the skills, right? And then she's in a community where the norms and values do not allow her, to get the skills. So she's just going to be stuck in that space. Meet Kiko's auntie, who utilizes fossil fuels, let's say firewood, to power her shea butter production, right? She has no access to information on how to connect to online markets and sell at a premium. So here you also see another instance of utility issues, right? And let's say that from using all that fossil fuels, she's going to have like health challenges, right? We know that women bear the brunt of kind of energy scarcity, clean energy scarcity in developing emerging markets. So Kiko's auntie is like an example, a classic example of that. Meet Kiko's mentor, who is a working woman, was recently assaulted by a driver on a ride-hailing app that she uses. The trauma led, and I'd like us to kind of watch how we shift from like, the actual, how do I put this? How we shift from like a problem that emanated from using a solution into the impact of the solution. The trauma led to low work productivity and cost promotion. Finally, meet Kiko's neighbors, who refused to use digital communication tools to run their club, saying that it leads to less in-person support, which is vital to them. So now that we've gone through these 6 women, I want you to take a step back and think about how many girls and women share similar experiences with Kiko and the women in her life. Think back to yourself, think to your family members, your friends, your colleagues at work, people just around you, right? Who need healthcare, who need jobs, who are getting education, who are working, who own their businesses, who are in associations and clubs and cooperative societies, and think about, your own society and the context in which, some of these needs would be expressed, and what challenges women face across the different dimensions of well-being in your own society, right? So for somebody who's in a developed country, it might be hard for you to relate to Kiko's auntie, for instance, who still uses fossil fuels, right? Right? But you possibly are in, you might know some other woman who's a business owner whose challenge is in the inability to secure funding for the scaling of her business, for instance, right? Both in developing and developed countries, you still have people who are having a hard time accessing markets. So what I really want you to do at this moment is just think about your own society, the challenges that women are facing across these different dimensions, and kind of just sit with, these needs against the backdrop of information, against the backdrop of access, of utility, and of impact. So these are the 4 dimensions that I want us to kind of use to evaluate these needs and challenges that women go through in their day-to-day lives, and then start thinking about possible technology-driven solutions that can solve, these issues. This is not a design thinking class, right? So I'm not asking you to start thinking about solutions from scratch. Maybe a great alternative will be for you to think about already existing solutions that you're seeing around you that can possibly, solve these problems, and then start to think about whether they really do solve these problems, right? Because there are digital banking services everywhere on every continent as of today, but there are still thousands to millions of women who don't have access to finance yet. So I want us to start thinking about the solutions and kind of dimensioning the nuances that are at play in our world today with respect to this, and then start identifying the gaps that we're finding across different societies that we're kind of familiar with. So this brings us to gender equality. And I think that this would be a great time for us to differentiate between gender equality and gender equity. A lot of times people tend to mistake both or use them interchangeably. But I'd like to kind of make this distinction so that we can make more informed or have better informed thought processes and really come at these issues from the right perspectives that would then enable us to have better outcomes in terms of preferring solutions that work. Gender equality is all about equal outcomes for women, men, and gender diverse people, primarily across agency, opportunities, resource allocation, etc. Right? And we tend to look at it from the kind of facets that a spectrum of facets, if you will. So economic, social, political, environmental, and otherwise. I think this would be a great place to kind of refer back to the 7 dimensions of well-being that we talked about. On the other hand, gender equity is the process that is undergone to achieve gender equality. This is where we recognize that wider gaps exist between some genders and the desired outcomes, and then begin to deploy mechanisms to bridge those gaps. I have an infographic here that kind of lets you see what I'm trying to say. So let's say that the desired outcome we're seeking here is internet access or just people having access to internet connectivity, right? And what do I call it now? The 2-stack kind of box that we're looking at is, say, the solution that you provide. On the left, we see the same solution being provided to a man and a woman, right? But then looking at the picture, you still see that for some reason, the woman, or let's say the women, right, are still encountering some difficulty accessing, that particular product or service, even though it's available, right? Let's assume that there were no regulations precluding women from accessing them, that this, solution is in the market, and that if women could access them, they would. But for some reason, we're seeing that there is a gap. Now, gender equity is about stepping back to say, what then do we do to get women to be a part in terms of that extra stack to our box that elevates women to then be on, at par with men in terms of accessing that opportunity. So what happens here is gender equity. You're basically kind of engendering a process that leads you to this grand outcome that is gender equality. Now, the key question following our now better understanding of this distinction is, how can our technological solutions be used to foster gender equity? One, gender integration. This is the process of identifying and then addressing gender inequalities and social exclusion during strategy, design, engineering, implementation, distribution, and monitoring and evaluation. So basically, with gender integration, you're looking at your, I don't want to say business cycle, let's say production cycle or your business model, right? And you're looking at like key functions or units where you can start using a gender lens to inform decision making, process, practice, and then outcomes as a result, right? So everything from strategy to like the design of your product, the development of your product, UI UX, experience, the engineering components, the health and safety components, actual implementation or taking this to market, your branding, and then monitoring and evaluation. I think it's important for me to stress the M&E component, because in business, we typically are very profit oriented and really just kind of take the cycle from production or development to market, and then it kind of ends there, perhaps beyond like customer engagement, customer service. But for us to really create value from gender equity or activities, we want to be able to monitor and evaluate whether or not they're indeed working, whether this gender lens that you've applied to your product, your service, your processes or operations is creating the outcome that you desire, and then kind of learn from that to inform improvements that you're bringing to your product or service. The second thing that we want to think about here is partnerships. Yes, we're working in technology, we're business people, but at the end of the day, your capabilities are limited to your specialization, right? Limited to your product, service, your function. And so you might not have the full scope of all the resources, right? Be they human resources, time, the financial resources, or just the technical expertise to drive gender equity, like throughout the continuum of your business or of your operations, if you will. So it makes a lot of sense for us to become more open to combine capabilities with relevant, businesses or business functions within the same organization, different organizations, or different stakeholders, say government, say just positive deviants in communities, advocates, to foster gender integration that we already talked about. Now, I wanted to take a minute to consider the gender equality continuum. Having talked about integrating gender equity, into our operations, I want us to kind of think about our solutions and be able to, after this, kind of interrogate whether or not our solutions are gender neutral or whether they are gender aware. Now, a gender neutral or gender blind solution does not, in its design, implementation, dissemination, etc., consider the set of economic, social, political roles, rights, responsibilities, or power relations that exist amongst males and females. So you basically see that, let's say that there's a need for a digital financial service, SAVE, that allows people to access microloans, right? And then you design a great product based on a model that you think works, and you put it into the market, right? You have a target market. You probably did like some market assessments to see whether there's a demand for it and all of that great stuff. But if your solution is gender blind, then you probably didn't take into consideration the different kind of the nuances that exist between men and women in your target markets in terms of the economic opportunities that they have, the kinds of businesses they run, the differences between them, the relations that exist. Are you going to have situations where women take loans only to, submit the money to their husbands, who then use them non-productive activities, which would then come back to be a bad loan for your clients, who are using your technology to disseminate these loans, etc. You really want to be able to dimension these things, and a gender blind solution doesn't do that. It doesn't think about how your solutions interact with these dynamics that I just described. On the other hand, a gender aware solution examines during the course of its design, implementation, dissemination, marketing, etc., the aforementioned considerations, and adopts positive approaches along a continuum to be able to get to this outcome of gender equality. Now, the continuum we like to think of as a three-part, spectrum, if you will. At the end of the day, in real life, it's not necessarily black or white, or in this case, red, yellow, green, just because of how local contexts differ and different socioeconomic situations are at play, right? So you might find yourself more to the right or more to the left. But at the end of the day, it helps to have a framework to be able to think about it and be able to kind of examine your solutions or the solutions that you're providing to see, kind of where they lie, or to estimate where they lie. Now, if your solution is gender exploitative, then it most likely reinforces or takes advantage of already existing gender inequalities rather, or stereotypes. This is exactly where you do not want to be, right? You do not want to be the the business or the tech company that produces a product, and even if the product is kind of available or is able to serve both male and female, say you then go in your branding or your advertisements and PR, you go with a campaign that somehow perpetuates a particular stereotype that, this product is for men, or women don't need, financial aid, or women don't, I don't know, like there are 1,001 kind of examples that I could possibly give. But at the end of the day, you do not want your technology or your solution to be exploitative, because this only worsens inequality. It does nothing to take us to the desired outcomes that we're striving for. Now, in the second category, if you will, you have gender-sensitive solutions. These are solutions that work around existing gender inequalities and differences. So here you're aware that there are nuances that exist that can create like gaps between male and female in terms of creating or maximizing the value that your product or service can bring. And you try to work around, this, create an extra feature that helps. Say your ride hailing app, you might want to add, say, an alert button for if a female rider feels unsafe or a female driver feels unsafe, that kind of thing. On the third front is the gender transformative solutions. Now here you're going beyond just working around existing inequalities or differences to critically examine gender norms and dynamics, especially in your target markets or target communities, and then go a step further to strengthen equitable gender norms and dynamics or create them, right? So this is when you then have people who are creating solutions, to that target women, or that, elevate women or empower women, or just adding components or projects to an existing product that would help women create better value. Just basically, this is the part where you're no longer reactive, right, to the situation on the ground in terms of just gender divides or gender gaps. And here you're beginning to take a more proactive stance in terms of kind of embedding these considerations in your product, in your service, and in either and or in the delivery of them. Now, as women in technology, business women, industry experts, advocates for women empowerment, there are certain things that we need to be actively doing now that we better understand what's at stake, and that our products, our services, the work that we do is capable of creating some change. We need to actively strive to examine, to question, to change rigid gender norms and power imbalances in order to reach gender equity objectives. We need to encourage critical awareness among our teams, our networks, our communities of gender dynamics and norms. We need to promote the position of and provide tools of empowerment to women and girls. We need to challenge the distribution of resources and allocation of duties between men and women on our teams, and in the utilization and dissemination of our solutions. And finally, we need to address the power relationships between women and others in the community. Now, if you really start taking a look at some of these things that I just kind of listed out, you begin to see how they feed into those four dimensions that I talked about earlier on: information, access, utility, and impact. We always want to use those as the backdrop against which we kind of examine or analyze our solutions, the needs that exist for them, and how they're, solving those problems. The impact part, I think everybody needs to take a minute to kind of sit with, because beyond just using your product for, to solve the intended problem, you want to be sure about the impacts that you're creating, right? And I think I'll kind of get into that more in the next slide. But I just wanted to mention that that's something to be on the lookout for. Now, how do we make these considerations for gender transformative solutions? For organizations, they can do this centrally, right, through delegated units. Say your social inclusion and diversity team can handle, gender integration. You can have a team, that works on gender integration for your product or service. You can, on the other hand, take a functional approach, right, where you kind of look at key functions within your organization, say the product development team, the design team, the engineering team, the team that works on user experience, the marketing team, and start interrogating how these, where and how these gender considerations align with, their own area of work, and then kind of work across these different teams to see where they can contribute, as a team and collaborate amongst themselves. For individuals, I would always recommend a collaborative approach, right? Because what a person can do would probably be better, or a person would probably be able to generate more and better outcomes if they collaborated with somebody else and combined capabilities to pursue a common goal. So I would always recommend, as an individual, you can volunteer with organizations, you can come up with projects that you deploy, with other people, in partnership with other people. You can, look for ways to create dialogue with other people. But basically, we have more value, or we have the promise of more value being created when we're engaging with other individuals when it comes to issues like this, because like we all know, gender is a social construct, it's a social issue, and we create the most value in kind of working on it together, working on these outcomes together. Now, regardless of whether you're an organization or an individual, the mechanisms for achieving this will be iterative. Um, it would not necessarily be linear, because again, you're dealing with people, you're dealing with their beliefs, their norms, their attitudes towards, gender related issues, and how these then interact with different facets of their lives, right? So it's almost impossible for you to have a linear approach or a one size fits all approach for deploying gender transformative solutions. So I recommend that you kind of look at it from a context specific perspective and begin to tailor whatever mechanism that or approach that you adopt to your specific products, your target markets, say your supply chain, your customers, and then begin to deconstruct or look at them based on, the different genders that are in those spaces, and then communities too. And I kind of put in communities here because we want to look at different people beyond, say, your supply chain, your producers, or people that directly are direct stakeholders, if you will. So here you want to think about users and beneficiaries, especially if they're different. There are certain products where users or the direct customers are not necessarily the beneficiaries of the product. So you want to kind of look at those two different categories of, so you are in a better position to determine who is a stakeholder in your business. But at the end of the day, what I'm trying to say is that these mechanisms will be iterative, and you have to kind of make them context specific, kind of learn and, using that iterative model, begin to tweak and adjust until you get, solutions that you think are better aligned to the spaces that you operate in. Now, this brings us to gender inclusion analysis framework. I thought it would be a great idea to kind of introduce you to a framework with which you can apply some of the things that I've talked about. So rather than have this be a theoretical session where you just have an idea of what to do, but kind of go about it in an arbitrary way. I figured it would be more valuable for us to talk about kind of practical ways that we can take on this challenge and begin to create value. This is framework framework is a great way, I think. AGI framework basically examines the differences in the roles and the norms for women, men, and gender diverse individuals in your target markets or beneficiary communities, the different levels of power that they hold, their differing needs, the constraints that they have, to accessing resources or solutions which, would be applicable to you by the time you get into those markets, opportunities, and the impact of these differences in their lives. There are different domains of analysis that we want to look at to kind of get a robust picture of, the gender landscape, if you will, and how it kind of interacts with the markets. So you have laws, policies, regulations, institutional practices. So what are the laws in that country or in that territory that you're looking to get into, or that you're already operating in, regarding just gender issues, right? Equal work opportunity regulations, are there acts, gender-based violence, just different types of policies or regulations that could apply to your product or service, or to kind of your brand promise or the mission that you have or you're looking to execute in that particular market. What are the cultural norms and beliefs of the people? And remember that a society kind of creates its socio-economic, political, cultural patterns, and these are deeply entrenched and are usually very sensitive, right? Because this is the purview around which people have built their lives. So you want to really sit down with this one and really look at people's cultural norms, how they react to, things, how they would react to your product, how they react to the introduction of the solution that you're bringing. How does it change their lives? How does it change, the systems that they already have powering their lives, and how would they take those changes, right? You want to think about their beliefs about women. You want to think about their beliefs about girls, because sometimes, it differs. You have communities where girls have very low power levels, if you will, in terms of decision making or contribution to community. And this kind of changes by the time they're elderly women, seniors. You then have some of those communities, being led by women. So sometimes the dynamics are different between women and girls, and you want to kind of get a sense of how this works in the markets that you're looking at, or the target customer segments that you're looking at. You want to look at gender roles, responsibilities, and time use. Um, you want to look at time use again. I think that's a very interesting kind of subject, because it kind of plays into utility of your product, plays into the decision making, as to whether to purchase, whether to subscribe, especially if your product is not a one-off product or service. You want to kind of look at these three different spaces: the roles, sorry, responsibilities, and time use, and basically try to get a better sense or forecast, if you will, how this will affect the use of your product. Access to and control over assets and resources. This is really key. Thinking back to Kiku and the women in her lives, you see that a lot of them had challenges with accessing, resources that would enable them get the outcomes that they needed or that they were seeking. Sometimes the access was just about unavailability of the product. Sometimes the access was about the insufficiency of the resources that they have to access those products. So you want to really look at access and control over assets and resources in those space. You want to look at proper differences between, what's applicable or obtainable for women in those markets or communities and for men, and how this would then play into the kind of solution that you're bringing to that society or community. You want to look at the patterns of power and decision making, right? A good way to kind of help you understand this is the reference that we made to just women being very influential when it comes to consumer, decision making. But at the end of the day, do they have the power to make the actual buy, the actual purchase? You have situations where women have the financial resources, to purchase goods or services or to utilize goods or services. But because of the power dynamics in their family or in their community, they don't. They just don't, right? They have the men making decisions or other genders making decisions. Um, so you want to think about these patterns of power and decision making and how they would affect decision making about the solution that you're providing to that community. And lastly, you want to kind of analyze human dignity, safety, wellness, and what they mean to the women that you're targeting, to the communities that you're targeting, and how this aligns with your product or the solution that you're bringing. Do you think that this, based off of their own um, conception of this subject, do you think that your products will be viewed as, maintaining their dignity, as safe for them, as improving their wellness, right? There are communities where a ride hailing app will not work because women are not allowed to be, in cars alone with men, for instance. They would feel unsafe. Like even if you put in say certain measures or assurances, they still might just not feel safe. And this brings us back to things like cultural norms. So you kind of want to look at these domains of analysis individually and then kind of also interrogate whether there are places where they overlap or where they're interlinked to get a full picture of how to, kind of create value from the findings of your analysis. And why do we need to have a gender inclusion analysis? Understanding this or carrying out an analysis and understanding your findings will help you to just better dimension the needs and the information channels that are available, or are applicable, right? The peculiar needs that your product or service can solve, and how to communicate value to target groups. So there are sometimes let's think back to Kiku's auntie, right, who doesn't know that there are online markets where she can sell, or online stores, or just an online market, let's use that phrase, where she can sell her shea butter, right, at a premium, and it's just selling, basically below the premium and losing out, on huge market opportunities or economic opportunities. So there are situations where even when your product or service is viable, the people have no information about it, right? Or are aware of it, but do not have adequate information to be able to access, purchase or subscribe and then utilize it. So a gender inclusion analysis helps you to better understand this. It helps you to better understand access, which is a huge deal when it comes to gender inequality. We have a huge digital divide between men and women. There's a huge gap in terms of access to clean energy. Women are the ones bearing the brunt of energy poverty, right? There's a huge opportunity in that space in terms of just the gender energy nexus, right? In terms of healthcare as well. So there are so many facets where we see that there's a huge gap when it comes to accessing solutions. And so I think this is a very critical component of the GIA, how to enable women gain better access to your solutions and whom to partner with to create such pipelines. Remember again that I spoke about partnerships when I talked about how to make considerations, right, for gender transformative solutions. Again, you might not have all the capabilities required to be able to deploy the model that you're thinking about deploying. So you want to make sure that you're able to collaborate and partner with entities or people or organizations, whatever the case is, that would help you create those pipelines that can grant women access to your solutions. It also helps you in terms of dimension utility, understanding utility, there, how to optimize the user experience and service delivery um, for your solutions so that women are maximizing the full benefit of the solution, right? So you have, for instance, Kiko's mother who is able to, use telemedicine to get a diagnosis, but has no access to the actual treatment. So in that kind of situation, you've kind of truncated the the channel of value, if you will, that she should be taking full advantage of, right? So at the end of the day, you find out that you have solutions that are kind of being deployed in silos, right? That are then creating, these gaps or even new problems, if you will, for the people who are using the product, the women who are using the products of the service. It will help you also better understand impact. So beyond what you think your solution or your product or service will be solving, what is the actual social, environmental, and cultural impact um, of what you've put into the market or what you're providing for women who adopt them? Um, are there adverse, possibly unintended impacts that you're now creating? Right? How do you go about mitigating these risks? That's a question that you can answer until you're able to get a robust picture of what your impact really is, right? A lot of times we have the intended impacts that our technological solutions are kind of set to achieve. And when it comes to us looking for feedback from the market, we just look at, whether we're ticking those boxes, whether we're generating those impacts that we intended without really creating room to consider the fact that we might also be generating adverse, impacts. I kind of tried to capture this in kind of the scenario that I painted with Kiku's aunties, right, who refused to use digital communication tools because they preferred the in-person support that they were providing to each other. Now that sounds like a fictional kind of scenario, but it actually did happen with a product that was deployed in Southeast Asia, I believe. I think it was a water technology, right, where women who had to walk for hours before this time to streams to get water would then have access to like boreholes and things like that. The women were using the new technology for couple of months, and after a while they just decided that we don't really want this. Why? Because those trips, hour-long trips that they were making to the stream were the only opportunity they had to socialize with one another. So when they started using this technology for accessing water that was a lot closer to them, it started breaking down their social units and the social bonds, community that they had built among themselves, and they didn't think that that was a trade-off worth making. So you really want to think about what the actual impact of your solutions are. Finally, again, partnerships. Who are the best stakeholders to collaborate with? The government of in the country where you're looking to get into, or the state or city. There are non-profits who are already doing gender related work, or just work around social inclusion, diversity, and have like gender components. There are other businesses, right, that you can create joint ventures with. There are civil societies where you have like people advocating for the issue that you're now going to be working on. Now, how do we apply findings from our gender inclusion analysis? We have a plethora of ways to do this, and kind of the ideas that I put forward are exhaustive. So you have internal engagements. You can apply these findings across different domains of analysis that we just talked about to product design. Um, you can deploy it to the engineering component of your operations and product development. It can be incorporated into health and safety, which is a big kind of sphere of concern when it comes to products and solutions that are being made for women. You can employ it to staffing, right? We saw the stats on women's labor force participation. You can make sure that your teams are more diverse. You can deploy this in branding. What's your brand message? What are you communicating about your product, about the use of your product, about who your product is creating value for? About just the possibilities that exist for women when they adopt, the use of your product or service. It can also be applied to market segmentation or product differentiation, right? So when you've made these findings, are there then peculiarities in certain markets or certain communities that would kind of necessitate making certain changes in certain features that exist, within your suite of products or services, right? Do you want to start making more customized solutions, that is, for, say, women in certain places or women in general, right? And I think this is a beautiful place to kind of start thinking about intersection and, the needs of a let's say the technological needs or the level of sophistication that goes into your technological solution would be different for a woman who's educated and a woman who's not educated, for instance. So you want to start thinking about intersections or intersectionality here and kind of use that to make an informed decision about changes to make in the product or in market strategy. Now, the external engagement component is where you can kind of apply these findings to situations that allow you to interface with, outside stakeholders. So whether it's like your market entry or community entry strategy, can benefit a lot from you doing a GIA. Your pricing strategy, right? We talked about just women sometimes not having affordable solutions, that they can adopt to solve the needs that they have. Um, you can apply this to your marketing and sales strategy. For instance, you can have innovative financing options. I know of a number of cases, of case studies in Southeast Asia where people are just creating really interesting financing options that would enable women kind of create this value. I remember in 2019, I kind of worked on this a team project where we're supposed to develop a clean energy solution, right? And then a financing model that would help women be able to afford it. And I remember that the community that we were looking to pilot the project in was a place that had a real issue with just plastic waste. And we just thought about, women cleaning up and getting all this waste and selling it to recycling company or like sending it to recycling companies, and then those ones providing them with credits that they can use to pay off some, of that solution. So I mean, the possibilities are endless, and it's really exciting when it comes to just, the different ways that we can plug in kind of solutions and innovation to create value from the things that we find from this GIA analysis, depending on, where we're looking to deploy our solutions. And I think this brings us back to the point that we made earlier on about context-specific solutions. You can apply these findings to your distribution techniques, to supply chain optimization processes or practices, customer service, and once again evaluation and learning. As you can see, I have etc. With each of them because this list is not exhaustive, and by the time you sit with your own business or your team to look at your own services, your own products, and your own operations, then I imagine that you're going to see new kind of functional opportunities for you to deploy or apply your findings. Now, another question, a really important question that we need to be answering is who should deliver this? Who can deliver this gender critique that we need to kind of be driving or pushing with our solutions? I think that an all hands on deck approach is the solution. I don't think that there is any one person or any one group of people who can independently deliver this or deliver this in isolation. The management and leadership of businesses and tech companies would be very important. the employees of businesses, and in this case, again, technology companies, will be very important because they're the ones doing the actual, kind of implementation of the strategy that we're developing from, applying the findings from our GIA to like different functions. You have government stakeholders. It's always great to have government buy-in. A lot of times, especially if the scale of what you're looking to deploy is really large, it might be a problem if you don't have government buy-in, because then it just slows down the process in a lot of way and creates bottlenecks that might kind of mess with the outcomes that you're looking for, or just minimize impact, if you will. Women from all walks of life are really important to this conversation, and in this context, women in technology, we are privileged to have been able to crossed or walked some of the gap, and should be able to take our experiences to begin to create pipelines for other women to begin to bridge that gap as well. So I think women have a critical role to play, both as advocates and as active solution providers when it comes to this particular topic. Men are very important as well. A lot of times, when talking about gender equality, some people tend to have these closed door conversations about it. But at the end of the day, for it to be really gender transformative, then there needs to be input from other genders as well, especially where you have positive deviants, right, who are like people in communities or markets or just societies that stand out from what is normal in that particular sphere and are kind of applying themselves positively to create better outcomes for the marginalized, right? So if you have a particular business leader who is a man and is doing great work in terms of just gender, let's say with his employees, or with his products, or with kind of environmental and social, actions, then you want to collaborate with that kind of person, or at least you want to, dialogue with them to start creating a ripple effect, if you will, in terms of just the networks that you guys have, or the circles that you operate in, to start create conversations about change. You also want civil groups and advocates to be involved. Now, the key to delivery of gender equality in the technology ecosystem lies in intentionality, right? We can have these conversations for as long as we want, but until we start being intentional about decision making, intentional about our strategy, intentional about our operations, intentional about just basically creating the stimulus that is required to trigger change, then we're not going to make any headway. You want to also make sure that you're actively engaging. So by the time you start becoming intentional about, gender integration, you want to make sure that you're actively engaging whoever needs to be engaged in your own space about this issue. You want to make sure that gender equality is no longer for you just seen from a solely humanitarian perspective. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but at the end of the day, just philanthropy, for instance, in isolation would probably not be able to deliver on magnitude of change that we require. So we want a situation where gender issues are being, pulled into the core of business strategy, the core of product development, the core of operational processes at our businesses and companies. And this then creates, an opportunity or a system that allows accountability, so that we're able to come back to the set objectives that we have and reevaluate over time, learn our lessons and reapply them in subsequent product cycles or subsequent growth stages, if you will. So at the end of the day, you can think about this as a cycle, if you will: the intentionality, active engagement, strategy and process, accountability, and then E&L. and then it becomes iterative, and you kind of hope that as you're going in cycles, you're then moving in direction of change that you want towards the desired outcome. The stimuli capable for triggering the wave of change that can revolutionize the role of technology in women's empowerment starts with women like us who are already, taking charge of ourselves to have these conversations, already placing a demand on ourselves to talk about these issues. Women like us who are here, willing to learn from other women from all walks of life, about their experiences, about the needs that they have, the challenges that they have or are solving. Um, I think this is a very important place to start. This is a very important place to be, and we can hold each other's hands. We can help each other. We can support each other to create, this system that hopefully will deliver the wave of change that we need. So I'd like to thank you very much for your time, and I hope that this session was super valuable to you, and that you're able to take concrete insights that you can apply to your team work, to your operations, to your personal work or projects, and begin to drive kind of the change that we require to deliver on gender equality. Thank you very much. You can email me if you have any questions or opportunities for collaboration at nazagada@gmail.com or umma_agada at gwu.edu. Thank you once again for your time.